Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Curtis Lockhart. I'm founder and director of the Africa Urban Lab, a research center and policy lab housed at the African School of Economics, Zanzibar. This is our second Q&A for our AUL working paper series. Today, we're discussing a working paper titled "In Sub-Saharan Africa, Laying Out the Urban Periphery Before Its Occupation May Be a Viable Path to Affordable Housing at Scale." The authors here are Professor Shlomo Angel from NYU's Marin Institute, give a wave, Solly, Devi Chalanga from Malawi's Ministry of Lands, and Carson Bjornson from Esri in California. So just for the agenda today, before diving into the Q&A part of this session, I'm going to give first a brief 2-minute overview of this paper, its motivation, its research question, just to set the stage. And then we will turn to asking the authors some questions about the working paper. So with that, diving in, I'll start with the motivation. So the paper, it starkly lays out Africa's urban population is projected to nearly triple between 2020 and 2050, from 460 million to nearly 1.3 billion people by mid-century. So this means, one, these cities will need to roughly triple their housing stock in 25 short years in order to keep pace. And two, it means if current density trends hold, the physical footprint of these cities is set to expand by a factor of 2.5. So urban land area is set to expand by 2.5 times in 25 short years. So here's the problem. More than half of the region's urban population currently lives in informal settlements, more commonly known as slums. These are neighborhoods that typically lack reliable water, sanitation, they lack public spaces, often lack durable housing and secure land title. And importantly, they also lack road connectivity that allows them to effectively access the broader urban job market. So this all brings us to the paper's central question. Is it possible to intervene before these informal settlements form in ways that improve housing outcomes while at the same time remaining affordable, given the limited resources of African governments and the limited incomes of people? In the working paper, these authors here, they argue a definitive yes, and they propose two concrete complementary interventions to do it. One is top-down, urban expansion planning, and the other is bottom-up, land subdivision, and we'll get into both of these. And they use a case study in Lilongwe, Malawi, to illustrate this. So with that very brief backdrop, let's turn to some questions. I'm going to turn it over first to Devi Chalanga. You're at the Ministry of Lands in Malawi. So for those just unfamiliar with this field, could you maybe first just briefly explain, what typically happens today when a family on the outskirts of a fast-growing city like Lilongwe wants to move in and acquire land and build a home? Just walk us through maybe that general process and maybe where it breaks down today.
Thank you very much. So for the top-down approach, governments through Minister of Lands or through the Lilongwe City Council do demarcate land for allocation in the form of plots, ideally servicing them with roads and electricity, water, and then they are made available through application forms. People apply and they are allocated, those who are successful. Unfortunately, this pathway, the number of available plots are very few compared to the people who are moving into the cities, such that it's attending to only a few. And sometimes the few also are associated with politicians or influential people, such that not everyone can access a piece of land using that method. We have Malawi Housing Corporation, a government statutory body to provide housing in our cities and urban centers. And they are also trying to construct some houses, but the number of the houses are far low compared to those who are demanding or looking for the shelter in the urban setup. As such, whether it's plot allocation for people to build residential houses by city council or the ministry, or making houses available by Mara Housing and other entities doing the housing provision, they are all overwhelmed with the demand. So the top-down approach is not working. And answering your question from the other angle, so people entering the city, finding a piece of land, maybe from the chief. Those who have money, they buy, they start building there without any plans. And that's why we're having slums. And some people are even doing that on public land, which was meant to be administered properly by government entities. So the informality is overtaking formality. And to regulate the sector is becoming difficult because of the number of people entering to the city against the number of the plots or houses made available. So it's that scenario. Thank you.
Great. And Devi, you mentioned both the two proposed interventions. The paper goes into depth on the top-down one and the bottom-up one. So maybe I'll just get Professor Angel Solly to chime in here and talk a little bit more about these two proposed interventions the paper discusses. One is urban expansion planning. That's the sort of top-down approach, and then complementing it is this more bottom-up approach with land subdivision and land pooling in partnership with traditional authorities. So, number one, why does your paper suggest that these might be impactful in providing urban housing at scale? And I guess in answering, feel free to use examples, whether it's the long way or other cases.
In very simple terms, we're proposing two complementary interventions. The first one is to lay out the urban periphery, the areas that are going to be required for urban expansion during the next 30 years, to lay them out with two principles in mind. First, to protect no-build zones, areas that should be left alone and not converted to urban use. And in the rest of the areas, create an arterial road grid, wide roads that carry trunk infrastructure that may be 25 to 30 meter wide, rights of way, and in a grid, maybe 1 kilometer apart, and somehow acquire the rights of way for this arterial road grid now before development gets there. And the importance of that arterial road is that this is a simple intervention, a simple urban planning intervention, but it lays out the urban periphery in a way that gives the government, the central government and the municipal government overall control on the way that the city develops, rather than running after the other stakeholders that are developing the city. And that arterial road grid does the job of connecting the urban periphery to the job market, so that the city remains integrated as one integrated job market where all workers have access to all jobs and all firms have access to all workers. So that it is very important from an economic development point of view, a job creation point of view, and giving the people on the urban periphery access to jobs. So that's the top down. It basically, in one sentence, is arterial grids and no-build zones. Mm-hmm. That would be the first intervention. The second intervention is, following what Devi mentioned before, the people who have some control over the land at the local level and who are dispensing land are the customary chiefs. And what we're trying to do is to get the customary chief to pool the lands and subdivide them into streets and plots, following municipal regulations and and land department regulations before they dispense of them. That will increase the value of the plot. It will create more value for the people, for the current landholders, and it would make it much easier to supply infrastructure services later. So the second intervention, you might call it land pooling and subdivision, led by customary chiefs with the support of the municipality and the government, and enlisting all the landholders in the planning so that they have a stake in the plan and in implementing the plan.
Okay, and maybe Professor Angel, I'll just ask you to elaborate a bit, because in particular, I guess, on the sequencing, because reading the paper, it takes a bit from this framework developed by, and I'm going to butcher the name, Sully, so please correct, Paul Barros,
Yeah.
Which he describes the formal urban development as a sequence of 4 different stages, right? So first, in formal urban development comes planning, and then servicing, and then building, right? Actually building the structures on the land. And then when the building is finished, occupying those buildings. So planning, servicing, building, occupying. But Barros argues for informal settlements, informal urban development, that sequence is typically flipped on its head. It's reversed. So people occupy the land first, and then they build, and they sort of build incrementally over time. And then the services come later, if they come at all. And then it finally, lastly, does formal planning and titling happen again, if at all. But in your paper, you guys are saying your approach is sort of a middle way between those 2 in terms of sequencing. So can you just go over that a little bit?
Yes, we're still retain the informal nature of the development. We don't expect this to turn into a formal land subdivision with planning, servicing, building, occupation. What we want to do is kind of minimal planning, then occupation, then building, and then servicing. We don't expect the subdivisions to be serviced before they are occupied, and we don't expect the buildings to be completed before they are occupied.
As in reality,
that's
not what happens, right? Yeah.
That's not what happens. So what always saying is, we want the plan, and we want the plan to be followed by occupation. Services will come in gradually, building will come in gradually, but we want to get the first 2 things, which is like planning and titling, you might say, before occupation and construction and servicing happens.
Because those 2 things can be made much, much more difficult after a bunch of people settle on the land. And not just difficult, but more costly as well, right?
Right. And sometimes impossible.
Yeah. And politically difficult. Okay, so we focused on Lilongwe and Malawi, and you do that in the paper as well. But just out of curiosity, and this is for everyone, anyone can chime in. Are there other examples from other regions where this 2-pronged approach was tried and worked? Any cities outside, like within the African region, but also in other regions? I'd be curious to hear.
The 2-pronged approach, we don't have very good examples of it. We have examples of one part of it happening. The arterial road grid was successfully implemented in several cities in Ethiopia. And recently we had a formal evaluation of these cities, mostly 4 regional capitals in Ethiopia, outside Addis, Hawassa, Adama, Bahir Dar, and Mekelle. Mekelle in particular has done very well in creating an arterial road grid. In the meantime, other cities like Gabile in Somaliland has created these arterial road grids. Several cities are doing it now. In terms of land pooling and subdivision, we don't have very good examples of where this has been done in Africa under the supervision of local chiefs, but it has been done in many parts of the world. Earlier in Germany, Australia, Japan, Korea, and lately in India, particularly in Ahmedabad in Gujarat, where there's kind of very active land pooling and subdivision. But the two of them together happening in one city, I'm not aware of any examples.
Okay.
If I can add here, Curtis. So one of the things with land pooling is that it's really around land consolidation, and throughout the world there are numerous examples for land consolidation as an instrument to actually do these types of reorganization of land tenure. And one of the things that the paper shows, and that's where we've used GIS, is just to show that we go in and we map the existing conditions, and in this case, it's community land. So in that way, that we're looking at usage. So what we're proposing is to map out what's the actual usage, because there could be an inherent right in that type of usage. And once that's done, then that gives the foundation for the chiefs to start to negotiate from a bottom up to the top down plan and start to identify exactly what type or how should we do the land consolidation through that land pooling. And this is a very participatory way of operating, including both the agricultural communities as well as the tribal chiefs. So in that way, it's a very proven pattern and very strong pattern in actually get agreement around land tenure, which, as you know, can be very contagious in many countries. So that's another strength of this, and that is a proven pattern. I think what Solly is saying is that we've tried to combine different approaches into this suggestion that we have in the paper, because many of the instruments and the thinking are already in place. We just need to bring it together.
Yeah. And I guess one other example that was brought up in the paper was the neighborhood from Peru, Comos, right? The squatters, they kind of pre-surveyed the land right before squatting there, before settling, and these pre-surveyed neighborhoods have homes selling. It was something like for $180,000 or something today, which is crazy. Well, I guess what allowed that particular community in Lima to coordinate so effectively, and is that type of coordination and cooperation replicable without the specific special sauce, the political conditions present in 1960s Lima?
I'll give part of the answer, but I'll ask Devi to give the other part of the answer as it pertains to Malawi. In Lima, I think the incentive for doing this was the provision of services by government later. That if there were roads, the roads would be paved, there would be water, there would be electricity. When I lived in this community for a month in 1969, there was no water supply. Water was brought in by trucks, and so that the services just got in much later, and the tenure was given during the Fujimori government much later. But I think the key was organizing. The key was just getting these people together to organize before they invade. Because
who did the organizing, Solly?
the organizing was done by community organizers, a lot of liberation priests, radical priests that were working with these people, and just community organizers. And they would organize the invasion, because the invasion was resisted by government. There would be attempts to get rid of them after they invaded. So other communities would come together with them to demonstrate and to keep them in place. And that was the time that there was a kind of a junta governing Peru, but the junta was socialist in ideology, so that they eventually allowed these people to stay. But there were community organizing, getting these people to all work together and all come together overnight and invade and build shacks and then start digging a channel along the edges of their plots in order to identify their plots. So that's the way this thing began.
Okay.
But I think it's very important to know that what's happening in Malawi now, and that the chiefs are on board, and that they are capable of doing it. The regulations allow it, but I'd let Debbie speak about that.
Thank you, Prof. So for the Malawi case currently, the legal framework is in such a way that customer land is recognized by law, and that the Physical Planning Act is advancing an agenda that the whole country is a planning area, such that even the customer land administration should be done subject to physical planning. So this legal framework has created a scheme that creates customer land committees at the group village headman level to regulate and administer all land processes. So we see that as an opportunity that the landowners can be guided, particularly those in the periphery, can be guided on how the planning can be done, including the land pooling or consolidation in a participatory manner, as I already stated, thereby regulating what would be an informality, particularly when it comes to the land use planning, so that services like water, electricity, and roads can follow after the planning. So that's what we are suggesting, that it's possible. And because land consolidation has already been an issue in Malawi, particularly in the irrigation sector, land has been consolidated. So we have examples, living examples, on the a possibility of consolidating and demarcating, planning, and then allow people to develop based on those plans, even without necessarily triggering compensation. Because the issue here is that if the top-down approach is to be successful, then government has to acquire land outside the municipal land as an extension, and that will trigger expropriation, and those monies are not available. So what do you do in the absence of those monies while the population is still growing and the demand is there? So we need to think of a hybrid approach to address the gap which is obtaining in our African cities.
And basically the incentive for these chiefs and the people in their sort of customary lands that you're trying to pool would be, hey guys, yes, you would be giving up some of the land to install these arterial roads and this infrastructure, but by installing those arterial roads connecting this area to the city and this infrastructure, your land values in the remaining land would go up significantly, more than compensating you for the land you're sort of giving up.
Exactly, and the demand is already there, and it would be more attractive compared to a nearby customer land which is not planned, but it's just being squatted without any regulation. Here I'm saying that the, 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 the implementation would be something backed by law, which provides secure tenure even to those who would be going to those land parcels to develop, because they would be given customer estates, and the customer estate is a land tenure which is in Malay context equal or superior to a freehold status. So it's possible. That's what I'm trying to explain.
Well, and I'll link people to our inaugural, our first AUL working paper, which is called The Economics of Greenfield Planning by Vernon Henderson and Tanner Regan, Guy Michaels, and a few other co-authors. because they look at basically a sites and services, a World Bank sites and services program or follow on to that program in Tanzania. And to exactly your guys' point, they look at that there's a boundary between this sites and services, so this planned, very, very limitedly planned land and this unplanned land. And fast forward to today, the planned on just this side of the boundary is more than that land is more than 2 times the value of the nearby unplanned land. And so kind of there's very good solid empirical evidence using very rigorous econometric techniques to justify what you guys are saying. Just on the
I want to excuse me, Curtis, I want to issue a kind of an important distinction here that was started by Devi, but it's very important to note that what we are advocating is not sites and services as conceived by the World Bank and others, because sites and services are still top-down, government-oriented projects on government land where the land is acquired and where compensation is required to get the land. We are trying to create a system that circumvents this whole idea of expropriation and compensation. And that's a major difference between what the approach that we're proposing, the bottom-up approach, which does not involve expropriation and compensation and is done by non-state actors,
right,
compared to sites and services, which is a top-down approach managed by state actors. That's a difference that we need to emphasize.
Yeah, and a big point to following on the point that Devi made is it's actively a disincentive for governments that the fact they have to go about this compensation exercise means that they do a lot less planning than they otherwise should do, because it's a huge disincentive to, and rightfully it's justified. You should have to compensate people for the land that they're on, but it's a huge disincentive for government to have to do this, right? And so it results in less planned land than otherwise should be the case, right? Yeah. Okay, so I have a question about the traditional authorities. So, and this is more, I guess, what could we say? Like steel manning a counter position. So traditional authorities in your guys' bottom up version, they play a central role to, Debbie, you've just gone over this, Sully, you have as well. But my reading of some of the evidence suggests that some of the traditional authorities and chiefs in these peri-urban areas, they are sometimes accused of land grabbing, right? They're sometimes accused of corrupt acts. They're sometimes accused of selling the same plot to multiple buyers. What are there mechanisms you're suggesting be put in place to kind of mitigate these chiefs from engaging in some of these more shady land dealings, such that they're incentivized to engage in proper land subdivision and land pooling without sort of capturing part of the land value uplift to themselves?
I think I can start, and my colleagues will add. As I said, the institutional arrangement in Malawi is that you can have a committee established, which chiefs are already aligned. This is legislated, and it's also addressing the issue of corruption, land grabbing and stuff. So the challenge of just relying on an individual who is a chief and maybe his close family relatives is that there's no accountability and transparency. But remember, this land is not for the chief per se. The chief is just a traditional leader. There are land owners within that traditional leadership. And if this is to be successful, then they should feel participating in the decision making, the landowners themselves. So by establishing the committee, you are assured of trust being improved, because they feel their concerns are also raised and taken on board, other than just a chief dictating. The legal framework has also created tribunals. There is a customer land tribunal. There is a district land tribunal in case you are not satisfied with how your land has been dealt with in the administration of which way the pathway, you can take that matter to a higher level for consideration. So I think in the Malawi case, from the legal side, it's watertight. What we need is to do the implementation side to get things done and move forward. But the worry of the chiefs, they are individuals, and it's very difficult to deal with individual thinking. But not all of them can do that. Things are changing, and with a lot of awareness raising for them to understand what's their role and what's the limitations of that role is very, very important when you're undertaking such kind of ventures. But my colleagues can add.
If there's no addition, I have a, because I'm from Canada and from Vancouver, and there's been a recent like very big urban development. It's an interesting case of in Canada we call them First Nations, but an Indigenous authority, traditional authority, partnering with a developer to develop urban land. And in Canada, I think similar to the United States, these First Nations groups, they have like a lot of autonomy over their land where it's demarcated. And so this is in Vancouver, it's called the Squamish Nation. They had this chunk of, it's now downtown Vancouver land. It was not downtown Vancouver land when they were given the land. And they realized they didn't have the expertise to develop that land themselves, but they realized it was very increasingly valuable as Vancouver grew. And so they partnered in a 50-50 partnership with a developer called West Group. And now it's called the Senequa project. We'll stick a link up to this. They're now building Hong Kong level densities near downtown Vancouver to, it helps Vancouver because Vancouver has, like a lot of North American cities, a housing shortage. So building a lot of housing is great and somewhat contributes to the affordability problem. It helps the, West Group, the developer makes a buck. It helps Vancouver, the local government, because they get some tax revenue from these properties. And then most importantly, it's a 50-50 partnership. And so the traditional authority gets a windfall for the Squamish Nation people that didn't otherwise receive any benefits from this land remaining undeveloped. So you can sort of arrange these things, I guess, institutionally or structurally, such that each of the parties involved have some incentive to see that land go to its highest value use, right? Sorry, that was a long spiel.
No.
In somewhat, I guess, transitioning to somewhat like sadder news, you did mention that the Lilongwe pilot project, it was terminated when the Trump administration cut I guess not all of, but most of USAID's budget. So setting aside that specific shock, and maybe Debbie, this is a question for you. How fragile would you say this approach is to political cycles? So I guess like if a new Malawian government came in and, unlike the original, the first government that liked this idea, they were a bit skeptical of this initiative, the new one. What would prevent the new government from simply ignoring the demarcated grid lines or the beacons that you put out or the trees that you plant along these to-be arterial roads?
Well, unless there is a motivation by the new government to do amendments to the laws, then there are no safeguards. But the current legal framework is such that it has been contentious from 1996 discussing until 2016 when it was legislated. And still contentious that time, but in 2022, the amendments were unanimously agreed by both sides of the aisle. So I don't see a motivation for changing the current legal status, which is in any case providing windows to implement physical planning and the customer land ownership using so many pathways. So answering your question, until now, this is a low risk. And just to add on your example from the Vancouver group, the Customer Land Act is providing for, I think, Section 21, that you can register your land as an individual or a group of persons or as a cooperative. In other words, the law has already created pathways that if I have my customary land in the periphery and I would want Curtis and others to work with me to develop on it, we can register it as a group of persons or a cooperative, so long we meet other requirements of, for example, if others are foreigners, what does the law say? But there are pathways that would accommodate so many investment proposals to make that land productive in a regulated manner. I think that's the issue, to make that land productive in a regulated manner.
Okay. And Solly, I wanted to come back to, because you mentioned Mekelle in Ethiopia as a good example of a place, a city, secondary city that really implemented urban expansion planning. And that was a fascinating example to me because so they implemented the grid, and it turns out down the line it even helped during the Civil War, right? By providing space for these internally displaced persons, these IDPs. But Ethiopia, in a sense, is also a bit unique, right? Because it has all land in Ethiopia is state-owned; it's public land. So I guess my question would be, how much does Mekelle's success, how much did it depend on that specific feature of Ethiopia, that all land is public land? And how well does it then translate to, I guess, countries like Kenya, for example, where it's more freehold, and less public land?
It's difficult to say, but we have other examples where we've worked in Colombia, for example, with some cities where large landowners were actually willing to give land for the arterial roads for free. And there are other examples in India, Ahmedabad, where, the entire ring road around Ahmedabad was obtained with 46 land pooling and subdivision schemes in a kind of freehold land market. So I don't think that the Ethiopia government land ownership really matters. And even in Ethiopia, the fact that government owns land doesn't mean that people don't have very strong rights to the land.
Right.
So I don't think there is a kind of a fundamental difference between Ethiopian cities and other cities when it comes to implementing the interventions that we're proposing.
Okay. So just moving on, I have a few more questions here. The paper, obviously, it focuses on the urban periphery, as the title suggests, these new expansion areas on the urban outskirts. I'm not saying I'm saying this. I'm saying some may say many African cities, they have large existing informal settlements in relatively central locations inside the city. Is there a version of this approach that works for more upgrading existing settlements, or is this like fundamentally a greenfield intervention, right? A lot of people would ask, what about the undeveloped or underdeveloped parts of the urban core?
The short answer is the areas that are already developed in the urban core are going to undergo different transformations. They are complementary to the two interventions that we're proposing. They're all going to have to be taking place. Our focus now is on expansion, but it doesn't mean that there are other works that we do and other interventions that we propose have to do with transformation of existing settlement area. But this particular paper or this particular intervention focuses on the conversion of rural to urban land on the peripheries of African cities.
Okay. And I mean, could there be an argument, part of this answer, could it be around political tractability too? Because I know in downtown core urban land, there's a ton of kind of pre-existing interests and entrenched stakeholders that might have an interest in the prevailing status quo to keep it dysfunctional or somewhat opaque. Whereas it's not like there are zero interests on the peripheries, but there are definitely probably fewer interests that push back against conversion into, in this case, urban residential land from agricultural peri-urban land. Is that sort of part of the argument, or no?
So the periphery in this context should not be understood as if it's very far away from the central business district. These are localities where sometimes the people think it's part of the city. It's only the municipal leadership or government which say the boundary is here. This is outside the city. When people have migrated into the city like Lilongwe, when they are developing there, they feel they are part of the city. So these are areas which are growing in terms of development. The land is still under the traditional authorities, not regulated. The people are associating themselves as city dwellers, while the city authorities are yet to adopt them because maybe the city boundary is not covering that area.
Right.
They are also benefiting from the city services somehow, while they're not even contributing to the city costs in terms of city rates and stuff. When you help the traditional authorities with such kind of planning, the values will go up and all those associated benefits of the city will change. So for me, as the Professor Sore says, the scope of the paper was not necessarily these slums which are near CBD because people want just to walk to the CBD and stuff. But in the long term, how do we help our cities to have not only a top-down approach, but bottom-up in such a way that we are building cities which are regulated? Because if you do this planning in this traditional authority area, you are assured that the arterial roads, you are controlling drainage system, and you answer the questions of the potential floods in the future, as opposed to these slums where you don't deal with any other issue related to how you manage the floods until they happen.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, the blame will go to the city leadership to say, this area has been, people are drowning there, it's flooded, what are you doing? And you have a justification to say, no, it's outside the city boundary. But these people associate themselves with the city, which they say we are in Lilongwe, for example.
Right. Okay, this is the last question. This has been great. Just coming to an end here, and this is for all of you. I'm indifferent to who goes first, so whoever chimes in first can go. So if you could get one African head of state to, read this paper and then act on it tomorrow, which country would you choose? And I want to know why too. So like, what features make that particular country more or less suited to this approach?
I would start to say Malawi because
I agree.
for example, in our case, the legal framework is very clear. The policy is very clear to enable using so many pathways to address the land shortages in our cities, and the informality is very, very high, such that we need to go outside the box to deal with the issue.
Solly said he'd agree. Karsten, any deviance away from the Malawi suggestion?
No, I concur with Devi. What's important here is that the legal framework is in place, and there's actually a pathway where you can do this bottom up, which is really the driving force behind this. And so I agree with Malawi. That would be a very good place to start.
Okay, well, I think
I
that's
concur. I,
Oh,
of
sorry,
course,
go for it.
concur too. I think that Malawi is the best place to start. It's peaceful, which is important. It has a really good civil service that is committed, I would say honest, to the best of my knowledge, and willing to experiment. And I am chagrined, of course, that they took away our funding from USAID, but I have my finger in several pots trying to recreate and rebuild this project, and I'm very confident that we will find the means to make it happen soon.
Well, Solly, let's end there because I know you and I chatted about this. Just if like, let's say, fortune shines brightly and there's a funder watching this, what is the level that was cut by USAID that you guys would need to restart or revamp the project?
$500,000.
Okay. So we're not talking about huge sums of money, and we're talking about
No.
large amounts of people.
No,
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's unimaginable. For $500,000, we could we could create rights of way for the arterial roads throughout the expansion area of Lilongwe, demarcating maybe some 700 kilometers of arterial roads, surveying and planting at least in the two areas of the customary chiefs where we want to do the pilot project, and we could do probably between 50 and 100 hectares of plots, which would be like maybe 1,600 plots that we could bring on the market, which is more than the annual production of the top-down approach that Devi described at the beginning of the discussion. So in terms of benefit cost ratio is extremely high. I know very few development projects that are being advanced now that have such a high benefit cost ratio.
And just one more piece of information, I think that would be useful. Is there an estimate of how many people this 700 kilometers of arterial roads and all these plots would affect? Give me a rough estimate if you don't know a specific number.
Well, Lilongwe is going to triple in population. We're talking about creating land for 2 to 3 million people to settle in. And then if we're talking about 1,600 plots, roughly multiply that by 4.5, 5, we're talking about 75,000 people that maybe helped. Sorry, 1,600 times 5, about 7,500 people that may be provided with affordable housing in this scheme.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to end. If there is further interest, I'll put our contact information in the show notes, and do reach out. I'll just close by saying again, I'm Curtis Lockhart. I'm founder and director of the Africa Urban Lab. You can learn more about the AUL's work at www.aul.city. You can find this working paper on the website as well. And then you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter at Africa Urban Lab. With that, thank you so much, Professor Angel. Thank you, Devi. Thank you, Carsten, for another great Q&A session for the AUL Working Paper Series. Thanks, guys, so much.